The night the Ottoman Crescent kissed the desert wind was not marked by war or conquest, but by silence so complete it seemed the stars themselves held their breath. Somewhere beyond the shifting sands and sun-bleached stones, the rhythm of an empire slowed to a heartbeat, steady and calm, humming through the air like an ancient lullaby. It was in this stillness that a story began, not one of generals or but of soft footfalls on moonlit paths, and the warm murmur of dates falling from palm trees under the weight of time. The desert lay stretched in its eternal yawn, vast and ageless, and the wind moved with purpose, not in haste, not in force, but like a whisper threading its way between stone and skin. It carried scents of jasmine and sandalwood, of spices packed tight in camel saddles, and smoke rising from clay ovens where flatbread puffed and browned. Somewhere in the distance, the low trill of a reed flute curled into the air, barely audible, yet unmistakably there, like a dream trying not to wake. In the village of Safwan, nestled near a shallow oasis, rimmed with reeds, the people had long since retreated into their homes. The lanterns flickered low, casting their sleepy orange glow on the walls of mud-brick dwellings. Every door was closed, every voice was hushed. Even the animals had grown quiet, their breathing soft as if lulled by the rhythm of the sand. Beneath an old fig tree whose roots clutched the soil like ancient fingers, a boy named Tarek lay on a woven mat, arms behind his head, eyes open to the sky. He was no more than 15, but his eyes held the gravity of someone older, someone who had seen the way shadows lengthen when a loved one leaves, and the silence they leave behind. His grandfather, once a caravan master, had died that spring, leaving behind nothing but a carved compass and stories spoken over tea. Now the compass lay beside Tarek's hand, its needle forever, twitching as if remembering paths it would never take again. Tarek listened to the night. He did not move. The wind curled around his ears, whispering things that could not be heard, only felt. It was a language without words, known only to the desert and those patient enough to listen. He closed his eyes but did not sleep. Not yet. From the shadows of the fig tree emerged a figure, old and cloaked, walking with the careful grace of someone who had once moved faster. It was Baba Yunes, the village storyteller, who never used the same tale twice, and whose voice was said to echo even in dreams. His beard flowed like cotton threads, silver and wild, and his eyes were dark and soft like sun-warmed dates. Tarek sat up and moved aside, making room on the mat. Baba Yunes nodded in thanks, and eased himself down with a slow sigh. For a moment, neither spoke. The stars looked down, expectant. Then, Baba Yunes spoke, his voice as soft as a palm leaf brushing sand. "You know, boy, not all stories need noise to be loud. Some begin with a silence so deep it reaches across time." Tarek nodded. "Tell me one." Baba Yunes closed his eyes for a second, then opened them. "Then listen well. For this is not just a tale. This is a night, hidden between the folds of time. The night the Ottoman Crescent kissed the desert wind. The wind stirred again, as if in recognition. Long ago, during the waning days of the Ottoman sun, when caravans moved like veins across the empire skin, a lone rider crossed the dunes, wrapped in robes the color of moonlight. His name was Idris, a cartographer of rare skill, whose maps were more art than measurement, more dream than geometry. He did not travel for gold nor glory. He mapped for one reason only: to find the quiet places left untouched, the whispers between lands, where stories hid beneath the surface like roots beneath dry ground. Idris had once served a pasha, sketching maps in grand halls filled with brass lanterns and thick carpets. But those days were behind him. He had left the cities when he no longer recognized the rhythm of their breath. Now he rode alone, his only companion a white mare named Noura, whose hooves made no sound upon the sand. He had heard whispers of a place, deep in the Sahara, where time did not move forward but spiraled inward. A village where people dreamed in colors not seen by waking eyes, where the desert hummed with memory and the wind spoke the names of the forgotten. It was not on any map, nor marked by any landmark, but Idris had felt its pull like a tide tugging at his spine. For days he rode, past crumbled forts and sleeping wells, past dry riverbeds that once danced with water. The stars above seemed to shift with his direction, guiding him through the quiet. He ate little, drank carefully, and rested only when the sun grew cruel. Noura carried him faithfully, her breath steady, her ears alert to things Idris could not hear. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind a ridge of orange stone, He saw it a shimmer on the horizon, neither mirage nor memory. He urged Nura forward until he reached a small rise overlooking a valley cupped like a hand between two ridges. There, nestled in the fold, was a village unlike any he had seen. Low homes with rounded edges, rooftops covered in cool cloth, gardens fed by trickling streams that should not have existed. He dismounted and approached, but no one met him. There were no guards, no merchants, no children running in the streets. Yet the village was not empty. He could feel it breathing. Lights glowed behind woven screens. The air smelled of saffron and rose, and somewhere nearby, a song floated, as soft as breath against a lover's ear. He walked through the alleys, following the song. At its end he found a courtyard, quiet and circular, with a fountain at its center, shaped like a crescent moon. An old man sat by the fountain, eyes closed, his hands resting in his lap. "You came," the man said, without opening his eyes. "I did not know I was expected," Idris replied. "All who carry the wind in their chest arrive eventually." Idris sat. The fountain trickled beside him. The man opened his eyes, and Idris saw they were clouded with age, yet sharp with knowing. "This place," the man said, "was once the center of everything. Not the world you know, not the empires drawn in ink, but the world beneath the world, the rhythm behind the rhythm." Idris did not understand, but he listened. "We remember stories here, not just tell them, we keep them alive. Every breath, every step, every stone holds memory." "And why me?" Idris asked. "Because you do not draw borders, you draw whispers." That night, Idris stayed. He lay beneath the stars in a courtyard warmed by lantern light. He dreamed not of battles or maps, but of water running through his fingers, of songs sung in languages he had never learned but somehow understood. He woke before dawn and found the village unchanged, yet changed. The people had emerged, smiling, silent. They brought him fruit, bread, and sweet tea. No one asked his name. No one asked why he had come. It was as if they already knew. He spent 7 days there. Each day he walked a different path. Each night he slept in a different garden. The villagers spoke little, yet everything he needed was given. On the 7th night, the wind rose, stronger than before, and he felt it not just in his skin, but in his chest, his bones. It was the wind that moved between stories, that stirred the forgotten. The next morning, he left. No one said goodbye. The village faded behind him, swallowed by the dunes. He never returned. He did not need to. The village was not a place, but a moment, a breath in time. He spent the rest of his life mapping again, but his lines curved softer, his ink faded lighter. He no longer searched for places, he searched for silences. Baba Yunus fell quiet. The wind rustled the fig leaves above them. Tarek lay back down and stared at the sky. "Do you think the village was real?" he asked. The old man smiled, eyes twinkling. "Some things are more real when you close your eyes." And with that, the night deepened. The crescent moon hovered above the desert, and the wind continued its slow, thoughtful journey, kissing each grain of sand as if it carried memory in its breath. The desert did not sleep, not truly. While people rested and fires dimmed, the dunes moved in silence, shifting just slightly, changing the shape of the world by the weight of wind alone. This was not a loud transformation, nor sudden, but it was constant, it was gentle, it was deep. Just as stories bend and grow with each telling, so too did the desert breathe in its own rhythm, slow and wide, like the sea without water. Tarek still lay beneath the fig tree, though his breathing had slowed, and his thoughts had begun to drift like lanterns on a river. Baba Yunus remained beside him, his legs crossed, his fingers resting gently on his knees. He seemed part of the night now, more shadow than man, more memory than voice, yet his words lingered in the air, quiet as stardust. "You asked if the village was real," Baba Yunus said at last, as if no time had passed. "But let me tell you something else, a story within a story. Because even Idris, even the cartographer who traced whispers and silence, was not the end. His path touched others, like threads crossing under the surface of a woven mat." Tarek did not answer, but his eyes moved beneath his lids, listening. "There was a girl named Layli," Baba Yunus continued, "who lived in a distant town wrapped in grapevines and almond trees, where the air smelled of lemons after rain. She had never seen the desert, not truly. Her world was stone walls and clay rooftops, crowded bazaars and hidden courtyards. Her fingers were stained with ink from poems she wrote in the margins of books, and every night, she dreamed of wind. Layli was the daughter of a bookseller. Her father's shop was narrow, but filled with scents that never faded: old parchment, cedar shelves, a trace of rosewater her mother used to wear. Every day, she helped her father stack volumes and greet the dusty scholars who wandered in like forgotten birds. But at night, when the lamps were turned low and the shop closed to the world, she would sneak to the rooftop with her notebook and listen to the air. She could not explain it, but she felt it. A pull, a beckoning from beyond the hills. The wind would shift, and she would turn her head, eyes scanning the stars as if they might offer some hint, some direction. It wasn't fear that filled her heart, but longing. She wanted to go where the sky touched the land, where stories were not read but walked. One morning, while rearranging the shelves, she found a thin scroll tucked behind a cracked atlas. It was rolled tight and tied with faded silk. When she opened it, she found a map like none she had seen before. No cities marked, no borders drawn, just curved lines like waves, and symbols that seemed to shimmer when the light caught them just right. At the bottom, one word, painted in delicate calligraphy: Idris. She did not know who he was, but something stirred in her chest. She took the scroll to her father, who turned it over in his hands, frowning thoughtfully. "This man was said to have wandered far," he murmured. "Farther than anyone. They say his maps are more dream than place." Layla traced the lines with her fingertip. Where did he go? No one knows. He vanished. Some say into the sand, others say into story. That night, she could not sleep. The wind pressed against the window like a visitor. She held the scroll to her chest and felt its weight light, but heavy in meaning. And before the morning sun rose, she made her decision. She left a note for her father, packed a satchel with bread, figs, a flask of water, and the scroll, and set off on foot. She walked away from the town, past vineyards and stone arches, through olive groves and fields where goats still slept. The sun rose behind her, warming her back, but she did not turn. She followed the wind, and the scroll in her bag seemed to hum, as if it too remembered the path. For days she walked, sleeping beneath trees, bathing in streams, trading verses for food at roadside inns. She spoke little, listened much. People offered her advice, warnings, stories of shifting dunes and cursed valleys, but she moved on, steady and silent. The map never changed, but it somehow always made sense, like it adjusted itself not to the land, but to her. One night, the sky turned a velvet so deep it seemed to swallow the stars, and she reached the edge of a plateau. Below her, the desert stretched endlessly, silver under the moon. Her breath caught. It was not fear, it was recognition, as if she had finally reached a place that had been waiting just for her. She descended carefully, her sandals whispering over loose stones. The wind rose to meet her, curling around her ankles like a cat, and then she saw them, the first traces of something not natural. Stones arranged in patterns, too perfect to be random. A low wall, half buried. A gate of wood bleached by sun, and beyond it, a path lined with lanterns that did not burn, but glowed faintly, as if lit by memory. She followed the path. The village welcomed her without words. Figures moved gently between homes, their robes light, their eyes knowing. No one asked her name. No one asked why she had come. She was given a place to sleep beneath hanging vines, beside a fountain shaped like a star. She dreamed of voices, not speaking, but singing, and of wind that carried the names of every place she had never seen. In the days that followed, she learned without being taught. She helped tend the gardens, sweep the courtyards, refilled the fountains. She listened to the older women tell stories not with words, but with cloth, their hands weaving tailies into silk. She followed a boy named Mikkel who carved lines in the sand with a stick, recreating maps she could not read, but somehow understood. Each night, the wind sang to her. Each day, her heart grew quieter, more still. Then, one morning, the village elder, a woman with eyes like obsidian and skin like carved wood, handed her a small bundle wrapped in red cloth. Inside was a compass, carved with symbols that matched those on the scroll. The needle did not point north. It spun, slowly, as if listening. "You carry the wind," the elder said, her voice soft as ash. "You carry the silence." Layla left that evening, though the village did not vanish like a dream. It remained behind her, a part of her. The wind at her back was not just wind. It was story. It was memory. She traveled from town to town, not looking for anything but simply walking. People offered her places to stay, food to share, questions she did not answer. She wrote poems on walls, tucked verses into tree bark, whispered stories to those who had forgotten how to sleep. She became a legend, not loud, but constant, a presence in the wind. And so, Baba Yun said, when you feel something shift in the air, when you dream of places you've never been, it may not be your imagination. It may be the wind, carrying stories once whispered by Idris, once walked by Tarek breathed deeply. The wind rustled again, more gently now, curling through the village, stirring the fig leaves. Somewhere far off, a dog barked once, then fell silent. Did they ever meet? Tarek asked, his voice thick with drowsiness. Perhaps, Baba Yun said, but if they did, they would not have needed to speak. They would have simply stood beside each other and known. The moon rose higher, and the stars leaned closer, and the night wrapped around the boy like a blanket woven of wind and memory. The story did not end. It only folded into itself, ready for the next dreamer to find. The desert remembered, not in words or lines, not in books or names, but in the hush between breaths, in the way the sand shifted around footsteps long gone, in the scent of cinnamon rising from ancient stone. The desert did not speak, but it listened, and through the wind it carried stories older than the crescent moon, stories that slept beneath palm trees, in old wells, in eyes that had watched too many sunrises without blinking. Tarek no longer spoke. He was lying still. Now, eyes closed, his chest rising and falling like the dunes under stars. Baba Yun's did not move either. He watched the sky, his fingers brushing his beard, as if counting something only he could feel. Not time, but rhythm. And then, without raising his voice, without pausing for breath, he continued. There was a man named Asim, he said softly, who had once been a soldier, though he no longer carried a sword. He walked with a limp that came from years past, from battles that left no winners. He had left the cities and the forts, the drums and the shouting. He wandered alone now, not in shame, not in fear, but in search of silence. Asim wore a cloak of faded red and carried no pack. He had no destination, only direction. He followed rivers that had dried into memory, stars that shifted like compass points. He did not seek to be found, nor did he run from anything. He simply walked, through date groves, past forgotten across cracked salt flats that sparkled under moonlight like scattered pearls. He had once been proud. Once he had marched in parades, medals on his chest, a sword at his side. But pride had turned heavy, and glory faded, and all that remained was the sound of his own footsteps. And so, one day, he had walked away, never looking back, not even once. On the 12th night of his journey through the southern wastes, a storm rose, not of sand, but of wind, sudden and strong, pushing hard against him, pressing him toward the east. He did not resist. He walked with it, letting it choose for him. By dawn, he found himself at the edge of a canyon he had never seen before. It was narrow and deep, cut by time rather than water. There were steps carved into the stone, uneven and worn. He descended slowly, one hand brushing the wall, each step echoing softly. At the bottom, the air was cool. A thin mist curled around the base, carrying the smell of old stone and jasmine. He followed the curve of the path until he reached a chamber half lit by shafts of light from above. There, seated on a bench carved into the wall, was a woman with her hair braided in silver cords. She did not look up when he entered. Her hands rested on her lap, calm and open. "You found it," she said. "I wasn't looking," he answered. "All who arrive say the same." He sat beside her, his breath steady. They said nothing for a long while. Time slowed, thickened, disappeared. "This place," she said at last, "is where old names go, names too heavy to carry. You may leave yours here, if you wish." He looked at her, saw the kindness in her expression, the peace in her shoulders. Then, "What will I be?" She smiled, faint and warm. "Anything else?" He did not speak again. He reached into the folds of his robe and took out a ribbon once pinned to his chest. He placed it beside the bench. Then he stood, and as he walked back up the steps, his limp grew lighter. By the time he reached the top, the wind had returned, gentler now, like an old friend. He walked on, but differently. Not as a soldier, not even as a man seeking something. He moved like the wind itself, through oases and orchards, through towns where children laughed and elders nodded at his passing. He told no stories, yet left them behind like seeds. People began to call him the Quiet One. He never stayed long, but always left something behind: a helping hand, a repaired wall, a smile to someone forgotten. Years later, in a distant village not marked on any map, a boy named Kareem found a ribbon tied to the branch of an olive tree. It fluttered in the breeze, soft and faded. He took it home to his grandfather, who ran a tiny shop that sold herbs and oils. The old man turned the ribbon over in his hand, then looked out the window with eyes gone far away. "This belonged to someone who chose peace," he whispered. Kareem did not understand, not fully, but he kept the ribbon. Years later, he tied it to the staff he carried as he walked across the desert, following only the wind, just like the one who had left it behind. Baba Yun's grew quiet again. A breeze touched the fig leaves above, then drifted onward. "You see," he said, "every soul the wind touches becomes part of it. It carries not just sand, but remembrance. And when someone listens closely enough, they can hear the ones who came before." Tarek breathed evenly. His eyes did not open. His body was still, but in his dreams, he walked beside a tall man in a red cloak, down a path carved into stone. The man did not speak, but his silence was soft, kind, and the boy followed, not afraid. The village was silent too, not in emptiness, but in fullness. Doors were closed, windows dark. Somewhere a lantern flickered behind cloth. Somewhere a clay pot cooled beside a sleeping cat. And above it all, the stars continued their patient watching. Baba Yuns closed his eyes. The story was still moving, still unfolding. It would not end tonight. It would not end at all. It would continue, carried on the breath of the desert, folded into the arms of the wind, ready for another dreamer to find it. The wind, once more, returned to the village, brushing the rooftops, weaving through alleyways, curling under doorways and through curtains, left half drawn. It moved as though remembering, as though tracing the same steps it had followed 100 years before. It did not hurry, it did not speak, but it brought with it the soft breath of distant places and long-forgotten names. Tarek still lay beneath the fig tree, his hands resting on his chest, his face calm and smooth as river stone. The stars above him were pale, but steady, as if holding vigil over the boy's silent dreaming. Baba Yuns had not moved, though his head now tilted slightly back, eyes almost closed, his breathing deep and slow. Still, his voice, when it came again, flowed easily into the night, as though it had always been there. "There was once a woman named Layla," he said, "who lived beside a desert lake that only appeared once every 7 years. It was not a lake known to most maps, nor spoken of in city halls. It was a place known only to birds, to camels who walked alone, to those who listened to the sky. Layla's home was a tent of many colors, not because she desired to be seen, but because each piece of cloth came from a place or a person she loved. One panel from a grandmother's wedding shawl, another from a merchant who once gifted her silk in exchange for a single poem. Her life was simple, but never lonely. She watched the stars, collected stories from travelers, and brewed tea with herbs only she could name. She had once lived in a city where stone walls pressed close and voices echoed too loudly. She had studied numbers and stars, and had walked the courtyards of palaces with scrolls in her hands and questions on her tongue. But cities grow loud when hearts grow quiet, and hers had grown quieter with each passing season. One morning, she had left, not out of sorrow, not even with goodbye, but simply with a feeling that her time had moved elsewhere. The desert did not greet her with kindness, but with honesty. The wind took her veil, the sun burned her skin, the nights froze her bones. But she learned. She watched lizards and owls and the way the dunes leaned before the wind. She found the lake not by searching, but by listening. When it appeared, calm and silver, between two gentle hills, she knew she had found her new home. Every 7 years, the lake returned, fed by some hidden spring beneath the sand. It reflected the stars perfectly, so perfectly that people said it was not water at all, but the sky remembering itself. For the years between, Layla stayed, even when the water vanished. She believed that patience was a kind of love. She waited, and she listened, and she remembered. Travelers came, not many, but enough. They heard rumors of the lake, of the woman with the colored tent. Some came for answers, others came to be silent. Layla welcomed them all with tea and a place to sit. She asked no questions. Most of the time, neither did they. She offered them a story, if they wished, and each story came with a cup of something warm and a moment of stillness. One evening, as a soft orange dusk settled across the dunes, a boy arrived, no more than 10 years old, with eyes wide and shoes worn. He said nothing, only looked at her as if she was something remembered from a dream. She gave him bread and tea, and waited. He never gave his name, but when he left the next morning, he left behind a feather, long and striped, tucked beneath her teacup. She never forgot him. Years passed. The lake appeared again, silent and perfect. The stars reflected just as they had before, but Layla noticed something different in their pattern. A shift, a bend, as though a new story had joined the sky. She smiled, and without saying a word, added a new panel to her tent. This one was silver and soft, the color of the lake when the wind moved across it. And to this day, Baba Yunus said, "They say the lake still returns." And Layla's tent still stands, held by poles carved with verses and ropes tied with song. If you pass that way, and if you are quiet, and if your heart is tired but open, you may find her. Or perhaps you may find only your reflection. And sometimes that is the same thing. Tarek breathed in, then out through the breeze, stirred the grass near his head, and the leaves whispered above him. Somewhere nearby, an old door creaked, then closed again. The fig tree stood firm, its trunk warm from the day's sun, its roots deep. The night had grown thicker now. Stars crowded closer. The air cooled, but not sharply, gently, like the breath of someone asleep beside you. Baba Yunus shifted just enough to lean back against the tree, letting it carry his weight. "There was another," he said, his voice low, steady, a musician named Harun, who played the oud so softly that birds would land near him, thinking it was wind. He lived alone in a tower of sand-colored stone, halfway between the edge of the empire and the beginning of nowhere. Harun did not seek fame. He did not play in palaces, nor in crowded halls. He played for the wind, for the dunes, for the stars. He believed that each note had a shape, and that if he played them just right, the wind would carry them to places where names had been forgotten. His uid was old, carved from desert wood, polished by time in oil and song. He played only at dusk, when shadows stretched long and golden, when the world became half dream. No one lived near him, but travelers would sometimes hear the music on the road, so faint they weren't sure if it was real. Some would follow it, finding him by the light of a single candle in his tower window. He never turned them away. He offered them cushions, sweet tea, and silence. Then, when the time was right, he would play. Not long, not loud, just enough to hush the dust in their minds. One day, a storm rolled in, fierce and unexpected. Wind screamed, sand swirled, and the sky turned dark. Harun brought his oud inside and waited. The storm lasted 2 days. When it passed, the dunes around his tower had shifted. Paths vanished. Landmarks were gone. The road no longer passed nearby. Harun did not mourn. He stepped outside, found the new path the wind had written, and sat atop a dune. Then he played again, and the music, soft and slow, rose like smoke into the clean sky. And some say, Baba Yunus whispered, that if you lose your way in the desert, and your heart is not in a hurry, you may hear his music, not from the air, but from inside your own chest. A rhythm that helps you remember the direction your soul was walking before you forgot. Tarek moved slightly, not waking, not speaking, just adjusting in his sleep. The fig leaves swayed above him, and the winds sighed through them like breath through lips. The village was still, the night was deep, and the story, soft and slow, continued to stretch itself across the sky. The stars had not moved, not truly, but they felt closer now, as if listening. The wind circled low through the fig branches, coiling like smoke, soft and light, not disturbing but comforting. Around Tarek, the village slept deeply. The lanterns had burned low behind the windows, and only the sound of the old fountain remained, trickling gently near the edge of the square. Baba Yunus sat with his hands in his lap, eyes nearly shut, his voice a steady murmur, the kind that rose and fell like the slow rocking of a boat drifting on calm waters. "There was once a boy named Sammy," he said, "who could not dream, not because he lacked imagination, nor because he feared the night, but because his mind, full of noise from the world around him, never learned how to let go. Sammy lived in a bustling port town where sails bloomed every morning like great flowers along the water's edge. His father was a fisherman, his mother sold herbs, and their days were full of shouts, bells, and rushing feet. Every night, Sammy would lie in his small bed, the sea breeze tapping at his shutters, his body tired but his thoughts still spinning. He heard everything: the waves, the creaking wood, the calls of sailors, the laughter from the street below. His head was filled with sounds that stayed long after the day had ended. He would close his eyes and wait for the dream to come, but it never did. Only thoughts, circling, tugging, whispering without end. One afternoon, after a long morning sorting fishing nets, Sammy met an old man sitting on a low stool near the docks. He wore a turban faded by sun, and a robe stitched at the edges with thread that shimmered like starlight. He was playing a game with stones on a cloth, but when Sammy walked by, he looked up and smiled. "You don't sleep," the man said. Sammy blinked. "I try, but I can't dream." The man nodded. "Then perhaps your dreams are not in your bed." "What does that mean?" "It means," the man said, "that sometimes dreams wait for us elsewhere, not where we expect. Come back tonight, when the moon is halfway to the sky." So Sammy did. When the village lights dimmed and the water grew quiet, he slipped from his home and walked to the edge of the docks. The old man was there, sitting in the same spot, beside a small lamp that barely glowed. Without a word, he gestured for Sammy to sit. "Close your eyes," he said. Sammy hesitated, then did. "Now listen, not outside, not to the wind or the sea, but inward." Sammy frowned, unsure, but he sat still, breathing slow. The old man said nothing more. Time passed. The sea hummed. The town soft. Sammy's breathing deepened, and then, just at the edge of sleep, he saw it. Not a picture, not a place, but a feeling. Warmth. Sand underfoot. A voice humming a tune he did not know but somehow remembered. It passed quickly, like the breeze between buildings, but it was a beginning. When he opened his eyes, the old man was gone. Only the cloth with the stones remained, each one in a different spot than before. Sammy took one stone home and placed it beneath his pillow. That night, he dreamed, not of ships, or noise, or shouts, but of quiet, of walking barefoot through a silent market, lanterns swaying above, soft music drifting like perfume. He awoke with tears on his cheeks and peace in his chest. From then on, he returned to the docks each week, and each time, the cloth and stones were waiting. The dreams grew. Fields, rivers, desert stars, not always clear, not always long, but always soft, always slow. Years later, when he grew older, he became a map maker, but not the kind who used ink and parchment. He mapped dreams, stories, silences. People would come to him not to find where they were, but to remember where they had once been. And that, Baba Yunus whispered, is how the world stays alive. Not by what is shouted or drawn, but by what is carried quietly, inside. Tarek's fingers moved slightly in his sleep, as if reaching. The wind slid across his skin, soft as cloth. The fig tree creaked gently, its roots holding the earth like the arms of someone patient and still. The desert beyond the village was quiet too, not empty, just resting. The dunes slept, the stones cooled. The owls blinked slowly beneath their feathers, perched in trees that no one remembered planting. The moon, now high, cast silver light in soft patterns across rooftops, walls, and the sleeping boy's cheek. There was also a baker, Baba Yun said, who never left his village, but whose bread was known beyond the mountains, beyond the rivers, even into cities that had never tasted sand. The baker's name was Yusuf. He was not young, nor old, not tall, not short. He wore a simple apron and always had flour on his hands. He sang as he worked, but only soft songs, songs his grandmother had hummed while grinding wheat. He rose before the sun and kneaded his dough by moonlight. He did not hurry. He folded each loaf like a letter, each roll like a prayer. When he placed them in the oven, he whispered a line from a poem he had learned as a child. He sold his bread in silence, smiling but rarely speaking. People came not for conversation, but for the way his bread felt in their hands, the way the crust cracked just so, the way the inside was always warm. Children said his bread never went stale. Elders claimed it tasted of memory. One morning, a caravan passed through, tired and dusty. The travelers were weary and cold, and Yusuf gave them loaves without asking for coin. They thanked him, left a stone carved with strange letters, and vanished into the hills. A month later, a merchant arrived from the far north. He had walked for weeks. He asked for Yusuf by name. "My wife tasted a loaf," he said. "She said she dreamed while eating it. I came to understand how. Yusuf handed him a small bag of flour and said only one word, patience. The merchant left smiling. Soon, people began arriving from farther away, not just for bread, but for stillness. Yusuf never expanded his shop, never built a bigger oven. He did not need to. The wind carried the scent far enough. Some said that when he finally passed, birds came and pecked the crumbs from his counter without fear. Others said his oven still glows warm on cold mornings, and if you place your hand near it, you'll hear a lullaby rise from the stone. So you see, Baba Yun said, barely above a breath now, the wind carries more than dust. It carries songs, stones, dreams, even the warmth of bread. And the more we listen, the more we find. The night deepened. The wind quieted again, its breath slow and steady, like a sleeper finally at rest. And Tariq, now wrapped in the calm of dreams, drifted through stories, his heart light, his mind finally still. The night breathed slowly. The wind moved in soft spirals over the rooftops, curled around clay pots, tugged gently at door curtains, and drifted like a sigh beneath the fig tree where Tariq slept. It carried stories that belonged to no one and everyone, folding time gently into the fabric of dreams. The stars blinked in their patient way, steady and unhurried, and the village around them settled deeper into quiet. Baba Yuns had not left the tree. His hands were now still in his lap, and his voice came low, not tired, not fading, but quieter, as though it belonged more to the wind than to him. He spoke like someone speaking to a fire, not to be heard loudly, but to keep something warm. There was a girl, he said, whose laughter changed the sky. Her name was Zaira. She lived in the high desert, where the rocks burned by day and glowed at night, where goats climbed like dancers across the narrow paths, and the air smelled of thyme and sun. Her village was made of white stone, houses close together like old friends. Her father was a stargazer, her mother tended bees. Zaira spent her days climbing rocks, skipping stones across dry riverbeds, and singing songs she invented as she went. Zaira laughed often, not to draw attention, not to impress, but because the world was always whispering things that only she seemed to hear. She heard jokes in the way the birds tilted their heads, in how the wind made leaves spin in sudden little dances, in the awkward walks of camels trying to look dignified. Her laugh was light, fast, not loud, and always real. It came from somewhere behind her eyes and lived in her chest. One evening, her father took her to the ridge above their village. They lay on a flat rock and looked at the stars. He showed her the constellations, tracing them with his finger, naming each one in a language older than either of them. "But who decides where the stars are?" she asked. "No one decides," he said. "They just are. Then maybe they're still moving. Perhaps." Zaira thought about this. Then she laughed again, sudden and bright, her voice echoing off the stone. Her father smiled. The next morning, the villagers awoke to find a new pattern in the sky. A small cluster of stars had shifted ever so slightly. Nothing big, nothing anyone else might notice, but the stargazer did, and when Zaira saw it, she clapped her hands and laughed again. It became a story. They said her laughter moved the sky. Some said it was a gift. Others called it coincidence. But more than once, when she laughed, strange things followed. A dry tree bloomed. A hawk circled, then landed beside her. A well thought to be dry-filled again. People began to visit her, travelers from far places, not to ask her to laugh, just to sit nearby, hoping. She never tried to perform. She simply lived. She still helped her mother with the bees. She still fed the goats. She still climbed her rocks. And sometimes, quietly, she laughed. One day, she met a man who wore no shoes and carried a small book filled with drawings. He came not with questions, but with silence. He sat beside her under a fig tree and drew the curve of her laugh, the shape it made in the air. She did not ask what he would do with it. She only gave him honey and told him about the star that looked like it blinked. After he left, no one ever saw him again. But weeks later, a new bird arrived in the valley, green, long-tailed, singing a tune no one had heard before. It stayed, built a nest in the fig tree. Years passed. Zaira grew taller. Her hair darkened, her laughter soft, but never left her. She did not become famous. She did not leave her village. But once a year, on a night when the moon dipped low, people still gathered on the ridge and looked for the stars she had moved. And maybe, Baba Yans said, the The sky moves every time someone laughs without fear. Every time someone finds joy in small things. Maybe it's not about shifting stars, but shifting hearts. And perhaps that's enough. Tarek stirred, not awake, not dreaming, but drifting somewhere in between. His hand moved slightly. His lips twitched faintly, as if reacting to something distant. The wind, sensing this, settled a little more around him, wrapping his shoulders and chest, soft as woven cloth. The fig tree creaked. The stars remained. The night thickened like warm ink. There was also a man, Baba Yuns continued, who spoke to shadows. His name was Mahir. He was neither young nor old. His skin the color of dusk, his eyes deep and always watching. He lived near the edge of the salt plains, where the earth cracked and shimmered, and nothing seemed to move. His home was a low stone house, with one window facing the sunrise and one facing the moon. Mahir had a strange habit. At dawn and dusk, when the light bent sideways and made the world soft, he would walk outside and talk to his shadow. He did not whisper. He did not shout. He spoke plainly, like to a friend, a brother, or an old companion returned from far travel. At first, no one noticed, but then a merchant passing by saw him speaking, pausing, listening, and then nodding. The merchant told others. Some laughed. Others grew curious. A few grew afraid. But Mahir did not mind. He did not invite, nor push away. He simply lived. One evening, a boy from the nearby village followed him secretly, watching him sit on the edge of a low dune, his shadow long behind him. "Why do you talk to it?" the boy asked, stepping out. Mahir smiled. "Because it remembers.
Remember?
Everything I've forgotten. Everything I don't know I carry." The boy sat beside him. "Does it talk back?" "Not with words, but yes." The boy frowned, then nodded slowly, as if pretending to understand. Mahir looked at him gently. "When you walk," he said, "your shadow never leaves you. Not when you run, not when you hide, not even in the dark. It waits, but it's not real. Not real like a stone. No, but real like a feeling, like silence, like the wind." The boy came again the next day, and the next. Others followed. Quietly, without ceremony, Mahir became a teacher of things not taught in books. He showed them how to watch, how the light moved across their skin, how the shadows shifted with breath and gesture. He taught them to sit still at dusk and listen to what they felt, but could not say. Years later, when Mahir was gone, the villagers built a bench on the dune where he used to sit. They called it the place of listening. Children still go there at sunset, place their hands on the sand, and talk to the shapes they cast. "Not every voice needs ears," Baba Yuan said, almost more to himself now. "Some need only light." The fig leaves fluttered. The earth held steady. A dog barked once in the distance, then fell quiet again. The story folded back into silence, not ended, only resting. Tarek's breath moved softly beneath the branches. His heart, though still, seemed to beat in rhythm with something larger, something slower, something very old and very kind. And the wind, carrying stories, laughter, shadows, and dreams, continued its quiet journey over the village and into the dark horizon beyond. The wind moved slowly now, no longer carrying urgency or question, only presence. It traced the line of the rooftops, folded itself along the path between clay walls, and slipped through the village with the ease of something that had always belonged. The fig tree held its branches firm above Tarek, the leaves shifting just slightly with the breeze, letting dots of moonlight fall across his sleeping face. The story was not finished. It had not begun or ended, but rather continued like the stars, in steady procession through silence. Baba Yones sat motionless. His voice, when it returned, did not rise above a murmur. It didn't need to. It flowed like water slipping over smooth stone. "There was once a man named Idran," he said, "who carried silence in a pouch. Idran was a merchant of few goods, but many roads. He traveled with a small wooden cart, pulled not by beast or by man, but by time. At least, that was what he said when people asked how he managed to arrive precisely when he was needed, but never sooner. The cart contained a few jars of dried fruit, a flask of mountain water, and a pouch made of dark linen, always tied with a red thread. He never opened it in public, never spoke of what was inside, but he carried it carefully, kept it close, and before resting each night, he would hold it in both hands and whisper something only the stars could hear. Villagers across the plains knew of him, not by voice, not by loud stories, but by the feeling he left behind, a feeling of stillness, of space cleared in the mind, of the way light felt after rain. He did not speak often, but when he did, it was always the right thing, and always enough. In one village, where the people had long forgotten how to sit quietly, he offered nothing but his presence. He arrived just before dusk, sat at the edge of the fountain, and closed his eyes. Within moments, children who had been shouting slowed to a murmur. Elders put down their arguing hands. Even the birds fell silent. By morning, he was gone. But in the center of the square, beneath a date tree, lay a small stone, smooth, flat, warm. Tied to it was a strip of red thread. From that day on, the people returned each evening to sit by the stone. They did not speak. They simply sat and listened. Idran continued. From valley to coast, mountain to oases, he moved. No one ever knew where he slept, though some said he did not sleep at all, only rested his silence beside rivers and allowed it to flow outward. Others said the pouch held a memory of someone he loved, and each time he reached a quiet place, he opened it slightly to let her voice breathe again. One child, curious beyond manners, once asked what was in the pouch. Idran smiled, a rare smile, not wide, but full. "It's not what's inside," he said, "it's what's not." And that was all. Years later, after he was no longer seen, people still spoke of the hush that followed his visits. A hush that wasn't empty, but full of waiting. A hush that made people remember things they hadn't known they had forgotten. And maybe, Baba Yuns added, the silence he carried wasn't his. Maybe it belonged to everyone, and he was just its keeper for a time. The wind curved gently around the base of the fig tree. Tarek's chest rose slowly, evenly. His brow was smooth, his lips parted slightly, his body held by the comfort of soundless stories. Far beyond the village, the dunes turned beneath the moon, their ridges soft as sleeping skin. A fox moved quietly across a ridge. An owl blinked once, then again, and returned to its perch. The desert did not need to speak. It was already known. There was once, Baba Yun said, a woman who measured time with water. Her name was Yasmin. She lived near the edge of a canyon where rain came only once each year. But when it came in full. Her home was carved from the canyon wall, smooth and round, like the inside of a shell. She wore robes the color of wet sand and moved with a slowness that never felt lazy, only precise. Each morning she would fill a wide clay bowl with water from her stored cistern, and from that bowl she would take what she needed for the day. One ladle to drink, one to wash, one to pour on the roots of a small pomegranate tree. The rest she left, not because she was afraid to lose it, but because she believed time was made of restraint. Visitors who came to her door always asked the same thing. "Why do you not use more?" And she always answered the same way. "Because I already have enough." She marked seasons not by calendar, but by how the light moved across her walls, how the pomegranate leaves shifted color, how the wind carried different scents. In spring, it smelled of warm stone. In summer, of sage. In winter, of distance. She made no money. She made no noise. But those who visited her always left quieter, softer, as if they had been reminded of something they'd never been taught. One day, a man lost in the canyon arrived at her door. He was thin, frantic, eyes wild. She gave him a single ladle of water and told him to sit. He did. He drank, then cried. She let him speak. She said nothing. When he left, he carried nothing in his hands, but he walked slower, as if his feet finally knew the weight of the earth. It became a tradition. Each year, when the rains came, Yasmin would pour water from her cistern back into the canyon stream. Not all of it, just enough. She said it was her way of giving time back to the world. And when she was gone, the canyon still remembered. A soft pool always formed near the bend in the wall, and no one could say why. It never dried completely. The birds still bathed in it, and travelers, if they came quietly, could still hear water dripping into it, even on the driest days. Time, Baba Yun said, is not kept in clocks or counted in coins. It is carried in the way we pour what we do not need. A gentle gust passed over the square. The fig leaves shook, not sharply, but in rhythm, like a lullaby, hummed under breath. The wind moved on. Tarek lay as he had before, one arm tucked across his chest, one leg bent slightly, his breath unchanged. The world around him had shifted, but he remained within it, folded into the calm of it all. And Baba Yones, his voice low and calm, continued his telling. There was a shepherd who never counted his flock, he said. But that is a story for next time. The wind did not pause. It never did. But tonight, it seemed to move with even more care, drifting through alleyways like a slow breath, touching doors, brushing against shutters, wrapping itself around the stories that lingered in stillness. The fig tree above Tarek's swayed just slightly, its branches whispering to the stars, while the boy beneath it lay motionless, carried far beyond the square and the village and the night itself. Baba Yunus remained as he had been, his body quiet, his voice steady. There was a shepherd, he said, who never counted his flock. His name was Ferris, a man whose hair had long since turned the color of ash, and whose hands bore the shape of mountains and wind. He lived on the edge of the grazing plains, where the grass met the dust, and the sky stretched so far you forgot what it was like to be surrounded by walls. Ferris owned a herd of sheep, though he never said how many. Others asked, always. Merchants, fellow herders, visitors from cities. They asked out of habit, out of curiosity, or out of the desire to compare. But Ferris would only smile and say, enough. The sheep knew him, not by command, but by comfort. He did not whistle or shout. He hummed instead, long, low tones that vibrated through the air like threads pulled through cloth. The sheep followed the sound, not because they feared him, because they recognized it. Each evening, he would lead them to a patch of earth soft by generations of footsteps. There, he would sit on a flat rock, while the sheep settled near. He did not fence them. He did not tie them. He let them be, trusting that their own rhythm would return them to his side. One day, a young traveler named Luckman came across Ferris on the plains. The boy had been walking alone for days, following a trail he no longer believed in. He saw the shepherd, the sheep, the stillness, and stopped. Do not worry, they will scatter, he asked, motioning to the herd, grazing freely across the slope. Ferris shook his head. They know I am here. But what if one wanders too far? Then it needed to. The boy frowned. And if it doesn't come back? Ferris looked at him, calm, as always. Then it was never lost. Luckman stayed for a time, curious. He watched the sheep and the shepherd, the way the day passed like water. He saw how Ferris mended his sandals with careful knots, how he drank tea from a clay cup cracked at the rim, how he spoke to the sky in the same voice he used for the sheep. Each evening Luckman waited for Ferris to count the herd, to mark them, to check for missing faces, but he never did. He only and the sheep, one by one, returned from wherever they had wandered, resting near him like old friends gathering around a fire. When Luckman left, Ferris gave him no map, no direction, only a small stone, smooth and cool, with a symbol carved into it, a spiral, endless and calm. Don't count what stays, Ferris told him. Feel what returns. Luckman went on to become a teacher in a village far away, known not for what he said, but for the way people felt in his presence. He never used numbers to measure worth. He watched eyes, listened to silence, and taught from stillness. And even now, Baba Yunus said, they say that if you find yourself lost on the edge of a plain, and you stop to listen carefully, you may hear a humming through the wind, and if you follow it, you might not find the shepherd, but you will find your way. The fig tree creaked again, a sound not of discomfort, but of age. The wind moved slowly beneath its leaves. Tarek's breathing, deep and measured, echoed the hum of Ferris's wordless song. There was no rush. The night belonged to no clock, only to rhythm. There was a potter, Baba Yunus said next, who made vessels that never held water, but always held memory. Her name was Salima. She lived in a village built into red hills, where the earth turned soft under the morning sun and shadows stretched long into evening. Her hands were always covered in clay, her nails stained with earth, and her clothing dotted with flecks of dust that never fully disappeared. Salima's pots were simple, no handles, no decoration, only curves, smooth as river stones, shapes that felt familiar even to strangers. She fired them in a low kiln that glowed red for hours, the heat slow, patient, never forced. People came to her asking for bowls, cups, urns, but her vessels, though strong, always leaked. They could not carry water, could not store grain, could not seal anything, yet still, people bought them, not because they needed them, because they felt something when they touched them. One traveler, after placing a coin on her table, said, I see my grandmother when I hold this. Another, eyes closed and fingers trailing the rim, whispered, this feels like my father's voice. Salima never explained, never promised anything. She only smiled, handed them a pot, and returned to her wheel. When asked how she did it, she said nothing, only pointed to the place where she'd let her pots dry, a quiet corner of her home, where an old scarf hung from the wall, and the light entered through a single small window, always at an angle. Years passed. Her collection grew. No two pieces were alike, yet all carried the same gentle energy. Visitors began leaving tokens beside her door: a feather, a bead, a button, a faded ribbon. She never removed them. Her home became a museum of unspoken things, memories folded into objects that no longer belonged to any one person. One evening, she stopped her wheel, cleaned her hands slowly, and walked out beyond the hills. She did not return. In her workshop, only one pot remained, unglazed, unfired, cool to the touch. When held, it carried no memory, only silence, stillness, waiting. They say it rests in a quiet room now, and if you sit with it long enough, what you need to remember will rise, not as a picture, not as a voice, but as a feeling, soft, full, familiar. And so, Baba Yons whispered, "Not all vessels are made to hold water. Some are made to hold what cannot be seen. And those are the ones that never empty." The wind hushed now, not gone, just resting. Like the pots, like the shepherd's song, like the stars above, which no longer moved, but simply waited. Tarek shifted slightly in his sleep. His mouth parted for a single breath, deeper than the last. His body wrapped in calm, his dreams wrapped in story. And Baba Yons, with the patience of the sand, waited for the wind to turn before continuing. The night moved like silk, stretching across the desert village with a softness that seemed to slow time itself. The wind, carrying secrets older than stone, wrapped gently around rooftops, slipped under doors, and wove between olive trees, bringing with it the faint scent of jasmine and distant sands. Tarek lay beneath the fig tree, breathing deep and even, his dreams drifting on the invisible currents that swirled overhead. Baba Yons, still seated at the tree's base, his voice low and steady, began again. There was once a woman named Amina who painted shadows with light. Amina lived in a town where days were long and bright, and the walls of her home were the color of sun-baked clay. She was neither young nor old, but carried the quiet patience of someone who had seen many seasons pass. Her fingers held the soft touch of an artist, and her eyes always searched for the spaces between things. She did not paint with brushes or pigments. Instead, she used mirrors, glass, and the play of sunlight. Her art was not fixed on canvas but danced on walls, floors, and faces, shifting with the hours and the moving sun. People came to her home, curious about the strange lights that flickered through her windows. They found themselves smiling at unexpected patterns, a glimmer that shaped itself into the curve of a smile, a shimmer that felt like the memory of laughter, a soft glow that reminded them of a quiet afternoon long ago. Amina taught those who asked how to see shadows, not as absence, but as presence. She showed them how light and dark could live together, each giving meaning to the other. Her lessons were not spoken loudly, but felt deeply, like a song hummed under breath. One evening, a traveler arrived with a broken mirror, its edges jagged and sharp. She took it gently, piecing it back together with strips of gold, making the cracks shine like veins of sunlight. When she returned it, the traveler said the mirror no longer reflected faces but feelings. "It shows what you cannot see," Amina said softly. Years passed, and Amina's art spread beyond her town, not through galleries or markets, but through the quiet moments people carried with them: a glance at a shifting shadow, the way light curved around a child's face, the comfort found in a shaded corner on a hot day. When she was gone, her mirrors remained, scattered in homes and marketplaces, catching and bending light in ways that made the world feel a little softer, a little kinder. Light, Baba Yons whispered, does not erase darkness. It shapes it, and in that shaping, we find the edges of our own stories. Tarek's breathing remained steady, his body still and at peace beneath the tree. The night deepened, stars winking gently in the sky, as if keeping watch over the unfolding tales. Next, Baba Yons said, there was a sailor named Murad who navigated by feeling the wind rather than reading the stars. Murad lived by the sea, where waves sang and the horizon stretched endless. He owned a small boat, weathered and worn, but sturdy. Unlike others, he never used charts or compasses. Instead, he trusted the wind on his face, the smell of the salt air, the pull of the currents beneath. Fishermen laughed at him, merchants doubted him, but Murad always returned. safe and sure, from voyages that others thought impossible. He said the sea spoke in whispers, and the wind was its voice. To listen was to understand, to feel the heart of the ocean. One day, a storm caught him far from shore. While others panicked, he closed his eyes and let the wind guide him, trusting its touch more than sight or reason. When the storm passed, he was near a small island unknown to map. Murad stayed, living simply, learning from the island's quiet rhythms. When he finally returned home, he carried with him a small shell, smooth and worn by time. And it is said, Baba Yuns continued, that if you hold that shell close to your ear, you don't just hear the sea, you hear the stories the wind has told me. The night wind shifted, stirring the leaves. The village was wrapped in a blanket of quiet that stretched endlessly, as if time itself had slowed to honor the moment. And Tariq, beneath the fig tree, continued to breathe, carried gently on the wings of these whispered tales. The night stretched wide and deep. The wind whispered through olive branches and stirred the sands far beyond the village, where the dunes rolled like quiet waves frozen in time. Tariq lay beneath the fig tree, cradled by shadow and moonlight, his breath steady, his body loose and calm, his mind adrift on the soft currents of story and silence. Baba Yuns's voice was a thread, pulling the night forward without rush. There was a traveler named Layla, he said, who spoke the language of the stars. Layla came from a place where mountains touched the sky and the air was thin and crisp. She was neither hurried nor slow, but moved with the grace of someone who had learned to listen. Her eyes held the quiet depth of distant horizons, and her hands were always ready to catch a falling leaf or a sudden breeze. She did not write with ink or paper. Instead, she recorded her stories in the constellations. Each star was a word, each cluster a sentence. Her tallies were not spoken aloud, but told in the silent arcs traced across the sky. People who looked up at night saw her stories unfold. They felt the rise and fall of her journeys in the sparkling patterns. They read not with eyes, but with something deeper, a knowing that settled softly in the chest. One evening, as she rested beneath a cedar tree, an old man approached, carrying a telescope and a notebook filled with sketches. He watched the stars with quiet reverence and said, "You speak in a language few can hear." Layla smiled, "But all can feel." She showed him how to see the stories not as distant points, but as living threads connecting past and present, dream and waking. Years later, after she had walked beyond the mountains, people still looked up at the sky and saw her tales shimmer. They learned to listen to the stars, and in doing so, found their own stories reflected in the light. Language, Baba Yuns said softly, is more than words. It is feeling, connection, and the spaces between. Tariq's breathing deepened, slow and even. The wind carried the scent of jasmine and warm earth, a lullaby older than any spoken tongue. There was also a healer named Sali. Baba Yuns continued, who mended wounds with silence. Sali lived where the desert met the valley, where water was scarce but kindness abundant. He was neither a man of science nor magic, but of presence. When someone was hurt, they came to him not for medicine, but for calm. He did not rush. He did not speak much. He sat beside those in pain and offered quiet. His hands moved gently, not always touching, but always near, like a promise. People left his care lighter, not always healed in body, but healed in spirit. One day, a woman arrived with a broken heart. She spoke only through tears and silence. Solly sat with her beneath an acacia tree, sharing the quiet until her breath found a steady rhythm. When she stood to leave, she smiled softly, carrying something that was not visible but deeply felt. Years later, Salih's place became a sanctuary of stillness. People came not just for healing but for the peace that lingered in the air. Sometimes, Baba Yuns said, the greatest medicine is the space we make for silence to breathe. The night grew softer still. The fig leaves stirred, a gentle murmur like a whispered promise. The stars hung heavy and close, and beneath them, Tariq slept, wrapped in the stories carried by the desert wind. The night moved slowly, draping the village in a cloak woven from moonlight and quiet. The wind carried the scent of dried herbs and earth cooled by shadow, weaving between the stone houses and curling around the fig tree where Tariq lay, peaceful and still, cradled by darkness and story. The stars watched without hurry, their light steady and calm, as if marking time itself. Baba Yuns's voice came soft, a gentle thread through the stillness. There was a man named Jamal, he said, who spoke to the desert stones. Jamal lived in a small house on the edge of the dunes, where the sand whispered secrets and the rocks held the memory of 1,000 years. He was neither young nor old, but his eyes held the quiet patience of stone itself, deep and knowing. His hands were rough from years of gathering stones, but gentle when he held them. Jamal believed every stone had a story, a history folded into its shape and texture. He collected them not for their size or color, but for the feeling they carried, the coolness of a morning breeze, the weight of a forgotten moment, the echo of a lost voice. He did not speak much, but when he did, his words were slow, like water carving rock. One evening, a traveler lost in the desert came to Jamal's door. The traveler was tired and thirsty, and sat silently beside a pile of stones arranged in a circle. Jamal handed him a smooth, flat stone. "This one holds calm," he said. The traveler held the stone, and though it was just a stone, he felt a quiet settle inside him. Jamal taught the traveler to listen not to the voice of people or animals, but to the silence between the breath of the earth beneath their feet. The traveler left with a new sense of direction, not marked by maps, but by feeling. Years later, the stones Jamal had gathered were scattered across the desert, resting quietly in hidden places. Those who found them felt a flicker of peace, a connection to something timeless. And so, Baba Yans whispered, sometimes the hardest stories are told without words, carried by the stillness of stone. The fig tree shifted softly in the breeze. Tarek's breathing remained even and deep, his dreams unfolding in silence. There was also a woman named Nur, Baba Yunus continued, who wove light into cloth. Nur lived in a village where the mornings were golden and the evenings soft as wool. Her fingers danced over threads, weaving not just fabric, but memory and light into every piece. She worked slowly, with care, never rushing, never forcing. People came from far to buy her cloth, not for its color or pattern, but for the way it felt wrapped around their skin, warm, gentle, like a hug from someone who remembered every story they ever told. Nur said her secret was to listen to the light, to catch the way it changed through the day, and weave that rhythm into the threads. One day, a child asked her, "How do you catch light in cloth?" Nur smiled and said, "By holding still enough to see it." When Nur was gone, her cloth was treasured like treasure itself. It was said that those who wore it could carry a piece of the sun and moon with them, soft and steady, wherever they went. And that, Baba Yon said, is how light lives on, not just in the sky, but in the warmth we share. The night deepened, the wind hushed to a whisper. The stars above blinked slowly, steady as ever. Tarek shifted in his sleep, wrapped in the gentle embrace of stories that carried him further into calm. The night stretched quietly, a vast blanket of darkness sprinkled with stars, folding softly over the village and the desert beyond. The wind moved gently, tracing the outlines of rooftops and weaving through the branches of the fig tree where Tarek rested, breathing deep and calm, his body wrapped in the tender embrace of night. Baba Yunus's voice rose gently, a soft murmur like the rustle of leaves. "There was a child named Sami," he began, "who spoke to the wind before he could speak to people. Sami lived where the desert met the river, a place where the land shifted from sand to water and back again like the pulse of a slow heartbeat. From the moment he could walk, he would stand beneath the open sky, arms outstretched, feeling the wind move over his skin, listening to the silent language it carried. People thought Sami was quiet, even shy, but in truth, he was learning to understand the invisible threads that tied the world together. The way the wind spoke of distant places, the way it carried scents and stories, the way it touched everything lightly yet surely. One afternoon, as a storm gathered on the horizon, Sami climbed to the top of a small hill, feeling the wind change with the clouds. He closed his eyes and let the breeze speak. When the rain came, he did not run, but stood still, letting the water wash over him, feeling it carry away the worries he could not yet name. His family worried for him, but Sami only smiled and said, "The wind knows what to do." As Sami grew, so did his understanding of the wind's quiet voice. He learned to read its moods, to predict its coming, to find comfort in its touch. He became a messenger of calm, passing on the wind's secrets through stories and songs. When Sami left his village, people said the wind followed him, soft and steady, carrying his laughter across the hills and valleys. And sometimes, Baba Yunus said, when the wind blows just right, you might hear a child's laughter carried on the breeze, reminding us all to listen a little closer. The night deepened further. The fig tree above rustled gently. Tarek's breath remained slow and even carried softly on the currents of these whispered tales. There was a weaver named Hanan, Baba Yunus continued, who wove stories into cloth. Hanan lived in a village where the nights were long and the stars felt close enough to touch. She worked with threads, dyed from plants and earth, each color holding a story, each pattern a memory passed from one hand to the next. Her weaving was slow and deliberate, each knot tied with care and intention. People came from far to watch her work, fascinated by how the cloth seemed to carry more than just fabric. It held dreams, hopes, and quiet wisdom. One evening, a traveler brought her a piece of old cloth, faded and worn. Hanan took it gently and wove it into a new tapestry, adding colors and shapes that told the story of the cloth's journey and of the hands that had held it before. When the tapestry was done, the traveler wept softly, feeling the weight of the past lifted and the promise of the future held safe. And so, Baba Yun said, weaving is not just making cloth, but weaving life itself, connecting past and present in the quiet spaces between. The wind whispered through the fig leaves once more. Tarek's body lay calm, cradled by the night and the soft unfolding of story. The night stretched wide and slow, the stars hanging low like scattered lanterns, their light spilling quietly over the village and the rolling sands beyond. The wind, gentle and patient, brushed softly against the fig tree's leaves, carrying the scent of warm earth and distant blossoms. Beneath its branches, Tarek lay still, breathing steady and calm, his dreams unfolding on the quiet currents of story and silence. Baba Yunus's voice came low, like a lullaby whispered through the cool air. There was a girl named Layla, he said, who spoke with the songs of the desert. Layla lived where the sands met the sky, where the heat of the day gave way to cool evenings and endless horizons. Her voice was soft, but filled with a power that came not from volume but from the heart. She sang songs that told of wandering stars, of ancient winds, of stories passed down through generations. People who heard her sing said it was as if the desert itself was speaking. Its voice carried in her melodies. Her songs could soothe a restless child, calm a frightened animal, or lift the spirits of weary travelers. One evening, as the moon rose full and bright, Layla sang beneath the open sky. The stars seemed to shimmer in time with her voice, and the wind carried her songs far across the dunes. A traveler, lost and tired, heard her from a distance and followed the sound until he found her beneath a lone acacia tree. He listened quietly, feeling the stories wrap around him like a warm cloak. When the song ended, the traveler thanked Layla and said, "Your voice carries the heart of the desert." Layla smiled and said, "The desert sings through all of us, if we listen." Years later, Layla's songs continued to echo in the wind, remembered and carried by those who knew the language of silence and song. Music, Baba Yunus said softly, is the language of the soul, spoken not in words, but in feeling. The night deepened, the stars blinking slowly, as if keeping a secret. The fig tree's leaves rustled gently, a soft breath in the stillness. Tarek's breathing was deep, and even, his body resting peacefully beneath the vast sky. There was a craftsman named Kamal, Baba Yunus continued, who carved stories into wood. Kamal lived where the forests met the desert, in a village filled with the scent of pine and sand. His hands were skilled, shaping wood into shapes that seemed to hold memory, figures of animals, symbols of journeys, patterns that told of beginnings and endings. He did not carve quickly, nor did he rush. Each cut was deliberate, each curve a thought. People came to him with pieces of wood, hoping he could help them remember. One day, a woman brought Kamal a block of driftwood, worn smooth by river and sea. She asked him to carve something that would remind her of home. Kamal worked silently, shaping the wood into a small boat. Its sails curved as if catching an invisible breeze. When he gave it back, the woman held it close, tears shining in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Now I carry my home with me." Kamal smiled and said, "Stories are not just told, they are carried, held, and shared." And so the carvings lived on, passed from hand to hand, holding pieces of life's journey in wood and time. The wind softened, carrying a faint scent of cedar and sage. The stars above blinked gently. Tarek remained still, wrapped in the soft embrace of night and story. The night held its breath, deep and vast, as the cool wind swept softly through the village and beyond, stirring the leaves of the fig tree where Tarek lay, still and calm, cradled by the shadows and the tender light of stars. The desert seemed to listen, its silence wrapping around the stories whispered by Baba. There was a traveler named Zanab, he began, who carried the scent of jasmine wherever she went. Zanab came from a land where flowers bloomed in the most unexpected places, even in the midst of arid sands and rocky hills. She was known not for what she said, but for the quiet presence she brought, a calm that seemed to follow her like a gentle breeze. She traveled slowly, carrying with her a small pouch filled with dried jasmine petals. Wherever she went, she would scatter a few along the path, leaving behind a faint, sweet scent that lingered long after she had passed. People who found the petals would stop, close their eyes, and breathe deeply. The scent brought memories of childhood mornings, of warm afternoons spent beneath blossoming trees, of gentle laughter carried on the wind. Zainab never explained why she did this. She only said, "The wind remembers what we forget." One evening, she arrived in a village shrouded in dust and worry. The people were tense, their voices sharp and hurried. Zainab scattered jasmine petals through the streets, the wind carrying their fragrance into every corner. Slowly, the people's voices softened. They smiled more often. The worries seemed to melt away like morning mist. Years later, long after Zainab had gone, travelers passing through still spoke of the village that smelled of jasmine, a place where calm grew like flowers in the desert. Sometimes, Baba Yans said, peace is carried not in words, but in scent, in small gifts left behind on the wind. The fig leaves shivered softly. Tariq's breath moved slowly, deeply. The stars wheeled silently overhead. There was a baker named Mustafa, Baba Yunus continued, who baked bread with stories knitted inside. Mustafa lived at the edge of the village, where the ovens glowed warmly through the cool nights. He did not bake quickly or in large batches. Instead, each loaf was crafted slowly, with care, the dough folded and pressed as if holding secrets. People came from all around, not just for the bread, but for the moments it created, sharing food, stories, laughter. Mustafa said that bread was more than nourishment, it was connection. One day, a traveler asked him how he baked stories into bread. Mustafa smiled and said, "By listening to the lives that passed through my door and folding their quiet moments into the dough." And so, the bread carried the weight of many days, the warmth of many hands, and the sweetness of countless stories. The wind softened to a whisper. The stars blinked slowly. Tariq lay wrapped in calm, carried gently on the breath of the night. The night's cool breath drifted steadily across the village, carrying a quiet calm that seemed to stretch without end. The stars above shone like distant lanterns, their light soft and steady. The fig tree's leaves rustled gently, wrapping Tariq in a soothing lullaby of sound and silence. His breath moved deep and even, his body held in the tender embrace of the desert night. Baba Yunus's voice rose softly, weaving another story into the fabric of the night. There was a smith named Hazen, he began, who forged, not metal, but patience. Hazen lived in a village nestled between rocky hills and sweeping sands, where the sun blazed fiercely by day, and the nights grew cool and quiet. His workshop was small and humble, the walls lined with tools worn smooth by time and use. Unlike other smiths, Hazen did not rush the fire or the hammer. He worked slowly, with a steady hand and a calm heart. Each piece he made carried the weight of his quiet resolve, not just strength of metal, but strength of spirit. Villagers came to him not only for tools or repairs, but for the sense of peace they found in his presence. One day, a young man brought a broken sword, jagged and worn from battle. Hazen took the blade, studying it carefully, then placed it in the fire. He did not strike it immediately. Instead, he waited, watching the glow deepen and shift, listening to the silence between the sparks. When he finally lifted the sword, it gleamed with a new light, its edges smooth and sure. The young man held it reverently, feeling the patience and care that had been forged into the steel. Hazen said simply, "Strength is born in stillness." Years later, people still spoke of the smith, whose work taught them that patience could be as strong as iron, and that quiet hands could shape the hardest things. The wind shifted softly, carrying the scent of burnt wood and distant rain. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, steady and bright. Tariq's breathing was steady, deep, as the story carried him gently onward. There was also a healer named Laith, Baba Yunus continued, who healed with the power of touch and silence. Laith lived near an oasis where palm trees swayed and water shimmered like glass. He was known not for loud words or dramatic cures, but for the calm presence he offered those in pain. His hands were gentle, his eyes patient, and his touch light as the breeze. People came to him from far and wide, not just for medicine, but to sit with him in quiet. Leith believed that healing began not only in the body, but in the stillness between moments. One day, a woman arrived, her heart heavy with grief. Leith sat beside her beneath a palm tree, placing his hand lightly over hers. Neither spoke. The silence stretched long, filled with the language of breath and the unspoken promise of care. When she finally rose to leave, her steps were lighter, her eyes clearer. Leith said softly, "Healing is the space where silence and touch meet." The night deepened, the wind a gentle whisper through the palms. The stars kept their slow vigil, and beneath the fig tree, Tarek lay still, carried by story and silence into peaceful dreams. The desert night held its quiet embrace, cool and expansive, the stars hanging like silent sentinels in the deep sky. The wind moved softly through the village, weaving between rooftops and rustling the fig tree leaves where Tarek rested, his breath steady and slow, his body at ease in the calm of the night. Baba Yunus's voice rose like a soft thread, weaving into the silence. "There was a storyteller named Malik," he said, "who spoke with the voice of the wind. Malik lived in a village surrounded by dunes and olive groves, where every evening the sky turned to shades of amber and violet. His words were gentle, not hurried or loud, but carried the weight of countless journeys and quiet reflections. He told tales not just with words, but with pauses and glances, with the soft rhythm of his breath and the stillness between stories. People gathered around him not to hear answers, but to feel the space stories created a place where memory and hope met. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Malik sat beneath a date palm and shared a story so soft it seemed to float on the breeze. His listeners leaned close, caught in the calm. He spun with every word. When the tale ended, a young girl asked, "How do you carry the wind in your voice?" Malik smiled and said, "By listening to the silence before it speaks." Years passed, and Malik's stories became part of the wind itself, carried from village to village, settling softly in the hearts of those who listen. Stories Baba Yunus whispered are not just told. They are felt, carried on the breath of the wind and held in the quiet places of the heart. Tarek's breathing deepened, slow and even, as the night wrapped around him like a soft blanket. There was also a gardener named Yasmin, Baba Yunus said, who grew gardens in the heart of the desert. Yasmin lived where the sands stretched endless and the sun was fierce. Yet she tended a garden of surprising beauty, flowers that bloomed in bright colors, herbs that filled the air with healing scents, and trees that offered shade and shelter. She worked, not quickly, but with care, planting each seed with a gentle hand and a quiet prayer. People marveled at her garden, a place where life thrived against all odds. One day a traveler asked how she made the desert bloom. Yasmin smiled and said, "By remembering that even the driest soil can hold a seed of hope." Her garden became a sanctuary, a place of calm and renewal for all who found it. The wind soft to a whisper. The stars above blinked slowly, steady and bright. Tarek lay still, carried softly on the stories and the night's gentle breath. The night draped the village in velvet shadows, the wind weaving softly through the fig tree leaves and carrying the faint scent of warm sand and distant blossoms. Above, the stars shimmered gently, watching over the quiet earth. Beneath the tree, Tarek breathed slowly and deeply, his body wrapped in calm, his mind adrift on the soft currents of story. Baba Yunus's voice, steady and low, wove another thread into the night's tapestry. "There was a merchant named Rashid," he began, "who traded not goods, but moments of kindness. Rashid traveled between villages, carrying little more than a small satchel and a gentle smile. He sold spices and fabrics, but what he truly offered were gifts, unseen, quiet, acts of kindness that lingered long after he had gone. When he met someone weary or sad, Rashid would share a story, a smile, or a small token, each one wrapped in care and understanding. People said that meeting Rashid was like catching a glimpse of light through a cloudy sky. One evening, as he rested beneath an olive tree, Rashid was asked why he gave so freely without asking for anything in return. He replied softly, "Kindness is the currency of the heart. It costs little, but is worth everything." Years later, tales of Rashid's generosity traveled far, carried on the wind and in the hearts of those who remembered. Sometimes, Baba Yunus said, the greatest treasures are not what we hold, but what we give away. The wind shifted gently, stirring the leaves above. Tariq's breath deepened, steady and slow, his body melting further into rest. There was also a weaver named Salma. Babayuns continued, who wove dreams into tapestries. Salma lived in a village where the nights were long and full of stars. Her fingers moved gracefully over threads dyed in the colors of dawn and dusk. Each tapestry she created told a story not of what was, but of what could be, woven with hope and quiet longing. People said her tapestries could inspire dreams and calm restless hearts. They hung them in their homes as reminders of possibility and peace. One day, a child asked her how she wove dreams into cloth. Salma smiled and said, "By weaving with the threads of hope and the silence between stitches." Her work became a legacy, carried forward by those who believed in the quiet power of dreams. The stars twinkled softly above. The wind whispered through the fig tree's branches. Tariq lay peaceful, carried gently by the stories and the night. The night settled like a soft blanket over the village and the endless dunes beyond. The stars shimmered quietly, their light a gentle rhythm in the vast sky. The wind, now calm and slow, whispered through the fig tree's leaves, wrapping Tariq in a soothing embrace. His breathing was steady and deep, his body heavy with rest, as the last stories of the night began to unfold. Babayuns's voice was a tender murmur, carrying the weight of years and the lightness of dreams. There was once a man named Emir, who understood that the greatest journeys are those of the heart. Emir lived on the edge of the desert, where the horizon seemed to melt into the sky. He was a traveler of places and people, but more than that, he was a traveler of time and feeling. He carried with him a small journal, worn and filled with memories not just of places visited, but of moments shared, kindnesses given, and lessons learned. One day, Emir sat beneath a lone palm, watching the sun dip beyond the dunes. He reflected on his travels, the faces he had met, the stories he had heard, and the silence he had come to cherish. He understood that every story, like every person, was a thread in a greater tapestry, woven together by the invisible hands of time and connection. Emir's greatest lesson was simple: that to truly journey is not to move endlessly forward, but to pause, listen, and carry the quiet moments within. As the stars blinked gently overhead, he closed his journal and smiled, knowing that every ending was simply the beginning of something new. Babayuns's voice softened further, and so the Ottoman Crescent kissed the desert wind, a quiet meeting of sky and earth, of story and silence, wrapping the night in peace. The wind sighed softly through the fig leaves. The stars held their vigil, steady and bright. Tariq's breath slowed, deep and even, his dreams calm and full. The night embraced him wholly, as it does all who listen to its stories, and in the stillness there was nothing but peace.